We are joined today by four people. Teresa Gutierrez is with us, May 1st, Coalition for Worker Immigrant Rights. Amin Husain with Tidal Magazine. Chris Hedges will be speaking at one of the mass gatherings today in New York City. And Marina Sitrin is a graduate student at CUNY, has been looking at these grassroots movements and participating in them around the world. What is Tidal Magazine, Amin Husain?
It's really a magazine for occupiers, whether they are actual or potential. And one of the things about this movement early on in August is that we intentionally chose not to pursue specific demands. And the other thing is to organize horizontally. But then how do you have a substantive conversations about the issues that concern us all on a daily basis? And in the processes that we take, we've created this magazine that is meant to engage intellectuals and people on the ground in conversations that are accessible to, people with ordinary, just average people during the day, from worker to student. And we wanted to elevate the type of thought and thinking. So, for example, Judith Butler wrote a piece on, why no demands, or what are the demands? And Marina Sitrin wrote a piece. And then people within the movement have written pieces, and they're in constant conversation.
And Tidal is T-I-D-A-L.
Yeah.
Why the title?
It's a wave, and I think that refers to what Chris Hedges is talking. This is just one wave, and all of us know the moment that we're in and how important it is. And the manifestations on the ground, whether they're visible to everyone or not, the conditions that brought it about are only going to deteriorate, and people are beginning to understand that we need another thing, another system, another way of thinking, one that's more inclusive.
Teresa Gutierrez, what exactly are the plans today?
Well, the plans are diverse. There's many things going on. It's a day of action, not only in New York City, but across the country. There's events starting from 8 a.m. and earlier. The May 1st Coalition will be gathering at 12 noon at Union Square. And
here in New York City.
Here in New York City, and the Labor, Occupy Wall Street, and Immigrant Rights Coalition will gather from 4 to 5:30.
How involved are unions in this?
Actually, very involved. There's been hours and hours of meetings in putting together May Day, and all of these organizations have been meeting almost every day in one way or the other. We'll be ending our march at Wall Street. We're marching further than we've marched in other years, and we'll be ending in front of the MTA office, and the president of TWU will be closing that rally. That's quite a message to Wall Street, that immigrants are uniting with one of the largest unions in the city and are supporting the call to respect their contract. And there'll be, of course, immigrant rights organizations that will also be closing the rally at Wall Street.
Taxi drivers are also involved?
Exactly. So it's very exciting. And these are news that are going on across the day. I do want to say that it's important that the May 1st Coalition is emphasizing what's going on in the Supreme Court right now. It appears as if sanctioning racial profiling and sanctioning the witch hunt against immigrants is going to become the law of the land. And so we definitely want to send a message of solidarity to the people of Arizona today. We understand that one of the key organizers in Tucson, for example, in Arizona, Isabel Garcia, received a threatening email. And if I received a threatening email the day before May Day, it wouldn't be such a big thing. But with Isabel receiving such an email in Arizona, it's very serious. And so we want to make sure that we're clear that we want to take a stand against what's going on in Arizona today at Union Square.
I mean, it's interesting that this movement has grown up under President Obama. President Obama, who, when you look at the polls now, for example, looking at Latinos and who their choice is, Romney is so low in these polls. And yet the largest number of deportations have taken place under President Obama.
Exactly. 1 million people have been deported. This is quite shocking. It's really a union issue. It's an issue of the progressive movement. We've got to get behind the call to stop the deportations. We've got to get behind the call for legalization. And that's one of the beauties of what's happening today, along the lines of what the brother here was saying from Occupy Wall Street movement. Yes, the issue of demands has been an interesting discussion, but the immigrant rights, the immigrant community has earned legalization, by the amount of wealth that they have contributed in this society, and we've got to stop, the attacks on immigrants.
Ahead of May Day, new reports have emerged of major banks working with police to monitor Occupy protesters. According to Bloomberg News, the nation's largest banks are sharing information about protesters' May Day plans amongst themselves as well as with police. This is Paul Violas, CEO of the firm Risk Control Strategies.
We're looking at a group of folks that are in fact organized, even though we don't give them credit for that. These are educated people. These are not only educated people, but they're intelligent. And on top of that, now they're well-funded. So if you put all of those things together, and then you take away, like our, good old Maslow used to say, hierarchy of needs, you take away their food, their water, their shelter, you take away their ability to earn, and now you have people that are just genuinely angry, and their disdain, their lips drip with disdain towards those that have. And I'm not saying it's justified or not justified, it is what it is. And that leads you into where we are today, this platform of risk, where the trajectory is going to be very clear. It's going to be, how do I interrupt business, and how do I make you pay? Someone is going to pay, according to them, for their lot in life, and that's the direction it looks like they're going to take.
Paul Violas, CEO of the firm Risk Control Strategies. Chris Hedges.
Well, there you go. That is a window into how frightened the elites are of this movement. And he laid it out in pretty stark terms. It's classic counterinsurgency tactics, something I watched up close for 5 years covering the war in El Salvador. You deny your opponent fixed base because it makes logistics extremely difficult. You keep them constantly on the move. You make it hard for them to organize and sustain themselves. You carry out constant harassment. And you mentioned the breaking down of the door of an Occupy activist in Brooklyn last night. That's just sort of de rigueur. And you infiltrate the movement. We've seen the external forces that have been deployed against the occupying encampments in a coordinated attempt to sort of wipe them out. What we don't see is the systematic effort to break the movement from the inside. And that is by creating divisions, discrediting the most effective leaders or locking them up. The resources of the state, which I think that this interview began to give us a glimpse of, are an indication of how worried they are, because this movement articulates a truth, a fundamental truth about our system, about the corporate coup d'etat that we have undergone. And
what do you mean by that?
That over the last decade or two, we have seen corporate forces seize all levers of power. The executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary. Certainly look at all of the Supreme Court rulings, including the most recent one on strip searching. Which said it was a complete inversion of law. It said that corrections officers and police officials are allowed to strip search you even if you're innocent, because the person who brought the suit had been stopped in a car. He had been innocent. They'd accused him of not paying a fine that he'd fined. They held him for a week. They strip searched him. So this person had committed no crime. He was in the passenger seat of the car that had been pulled over. And that's just an inversion of law. It means that you cannot question the abuse of authority. I mean, that's just a small window. 2001 Citizens United essentially extinguished what is left of participatory democracy in this country. And as Amin correctly pointed out, we are spiraling downward in this new world of global neo-feudalism, this world of masters and serfs. And as more and more people wake up, they are going to have to implement the harsher measures of control that we see being made into law, such as the Espionage Act, which has been used 6 times by the Obama administration to shut down people who have exposed war crimes and malfeasance by the government, so that only the official narrative is palatable or permissible. And we're seeing that as they leak information about the murder. Let's be clear, Osama bin Laden was unarmed. The murder or assassination of Osama bin Laden. Investigative reporters in this country will tell you sources have utterly dried up, and that, as you mentioned before, is why I and other plaintiffs, including Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg, and Cornel West is going to join us, and Naomi Wolf, are suing over the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows the military to become a policing agent in this country, to detain American citizens, hold them without due process, including holding them in our offshore penal colonies until, in the language of this bill, the end of hostilities, which in an age of permanent war is forever. And we have to stop looking. Teresa correctly pointed out, I mean, and you pointed out, that this is a president who has carried out the most egregious assaults on our civil liberties, far worse than the Bush administration, and through the magic of public relations, we continue to be utterly fooled by what's happening.
Marina Sitrin, you're one of the people who will be teaching about legal rights today.
I'm part of the activist legal working group in Occupy, and we've been doing
and explain
trainings.
The working groups.
There are dozens, hundreds of working groups, actually, that do everything from medical care, mediation, media, dozens of groups all over that'll be, kind of coordinating all kinds of infrastructural things as well as theoretical conversations. So there are many pieces of working groups that are working on, like the Free University today, which is in Madison Park, which is going to have tons of popular education with CUNY professors having their classes outdoors.
In New York City, that's over at 23rd Street and Fifth Avenue.
And so the Legal Working Group is an activist working group that works with the National Lawyers Guild and other radical lawyers who are supporting us in the movement. And what we do is both informing people of their rights, of these egregious, kind of outrageous attacks on our rights, but then we also talk about solidarity. How do we take care of one another, which is what this movement is really about. So yes, there are all of these attempts by the state to demobilize us, to create fear. So what we do is actually practice what happens if a police officer knocks on your door, or what happens in the process if the police try to pen you in, and how to create solidarity with one another, which is really what this movement is about. And something Chris said earlier, talking about revolution, or what kind of process we're on, and Marx talked about revolution as a train, and then Walter Benjamin talked about, actually, perhaps it's not a train. Perhaps it's actually the moment when everybody on the train pulls the emergency brake. And I think that's what we see with our movement, and that's what May Day is about pulling that brake, saying stop, and opening up new spaces where we can create the alternatives, supporting one another in solidarity without that kind of fear.
You all sound somewhat like you agree, but you don't. Chris, you wrote a piece called "The Cancer in Occupy." Lay out your concern.
My concern is that the tactics of people who identify themselves as Black Bloc, i.e. petty vandalism, taunting the police, covering your faces, are the portal by which the agents provocateurs can enter and destroy the movement. The power of the Occupy movement is that it is a mainstream movement. It expresses and articulates the grievances of the mainstream, which are not articulated during this political process. They are not articulated on MSNBC or Fox or any of the other commercial corporate networks. If you look at the opinion polls, whether it's on health care, whether it's on the looting of the U.S. Treasury and the largest transference of wealth upwards in American history, whether it's on foreclosures and bank repossessions of homes, whether it is this failure to confront egregious levels of unemployment, especially for those under the age of 25, the Occupy movement expresses what the majority feels. And the goal of the security state is to sever the movement from the mainstream. And the way they will do that is by using groups, and some of these people may be well-meaning, but by using groups that will frighten the mainstream away. You do not want to have demonstrations where you permit people to cover their faces. That's a gift to infiltrators. We cannot beat the security and surveillance state at their own game. We can't. Our power, and Václav Havel wrote this in his 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless. There's a kind of incongruity to it, but our greatest strength is our powerlessness and our transparency, and we can't give that up. I'm not a member of Occupy. I've never identified myself as a member of Occupy. I'm deeply supportive of the movement, but I think, like any writer, any intellectual, one has to be critical. And I know that this has caused a great deal of dissension because within the movement there is this noble idea that, we can include everybody. It can be all-inclusive. But in fact, in order for the movement to survive, it's going to have to make some tough decisions about agreements, about nonviolence, about transparency, because the way that revolutions work is that you create paralysis within those pillars of authority. most revolutions, including the Russian Revolution, were nonviolent enterprises. It's when you have the Petrograd riots, the bread riots in 1917, the Cossacks are sent down to quell them, and they don't. They join the crowds. The storming of the Bastille was only made possible because French troops defected and joined the crowds to overthrow the prison. This is always how revolutionary movements work, and the fact is, because we articulate a truth, because we expose the deep corruption within the system, there are always elements within that system that are hesitant to use force or use force effectively because they know how rotten it is. And I saw that in East Germany when, which I covered the revolution there. Erich Honecker sends down an elite paratroop division to Leipzig, where the candlelit vigils that eventually swelled to 500,000 people, and the paratroopers wouldn't fire on the crowd. Honecker lasted another week in power. And so my criticism of the Black Bloc is one over tactic. And I will just conclude by saying I'm not a pacifist. I was in Sarajevo during the war. Human beings can be pushed to a point, you were in East Timor, where violence is the only way that they can protect themselves, their families, their communities. But we're not there yet. And hopefully we'll never get there.
Amin Husain, can you respond to what Chris Hedges has said?
Well, I mean, I respect Chris Hedges a great deal, and he's been a great supporter of the movement. I do think that the word movement constrains our thinking. And I think in the 21st century, where capitalism is everywhere, it needs to require a new type of struggle and reconceptualization of how that works. I think the way decisions get made in Occupy is by dialogue and by impacting each other in our way of thinking and growing together and building power within and amongst each other. And the statement, the concerns, though valid, and I was in the Palestinian uprising, and we covered our faces in the first Palestinian uprising, and we did cover our faces, and then we made decisions at certain times not to cover our faces, depending on what action we were doing. And I think you have very smart people in this movement who are aware of the provocateur, which covering your face or not won't necessarily stop that from happening, right? And Marina Sitrin has a great article in the second issue of Tidal talking about provocateurs, and in this context of a movement and how we're organized, how they can be very effective in disrupting that. But I want to get back to that. There's also, we have to rethink what is we. Because I think in this ties into what you're saying, and the idea is like, we have demands of each other, right? We're not speaking to power because we don't think it's legitimate. Our actions, by taking public space and having and doing mutual aid type of stuff, and I don't identify myself as an anarchist. I'm coming from a strategic standpoint. Nothing's off the table. You empower individuals. You know, you don't disempower them. There are smart people that are making strategic decisions over here. It's an oversimplification to just say that the movement needs to make a decision without really kind of rethinking how we work. The other thing I want to add is, like, in this context of, you know, the article, though very good points, and many people in the movement felt it was good because it sparked a conversation, it came at a time when it almost derailed us. And we've worked with each other, you know, on the issue of Trinity and Duarte Square, and it's like we would have appreciated a phone call because we would have facilitated these conversations which needed to happen. And because of, thanks to your article, we've overcome it. And we have a deeper sense, because we've talked about violence versus diversity of tactics back in August, and it was heated conversations. But many other people joined, and the conversation needed to be had again. And this is why we have Tidal, to always have these conversations.
Marina Sitrin, what about that issue of provocateurs?
I mean, there's always, that is what the state will do, is try to disrupt this movement, or what it's even more than a movement, because so many people, probably millions of people, identify with Occupy and whatever that means. And so is that dangerous to institutions of power in the banks, like we saw in the earlier video? Yes, it definitely is, because we don't even want to recognize that power in the sense of we're looking to one another, we're trying to create something different. So will they try to disrupt the movements? Yes, that's history, and that's why we do popular education, and it is why it's so important that we talk with one another and create these horizontal spaces to do it. It's actually not useful at all from the outside to tell the movements what to do, especially with people who have access to publish in certain places, and there's quite a few, whether well-meaning, people, Zizek, telling us we must be serious revolutionaries and anti-capitalists and do this, that, and the other. And, you know, with all respect, either engage in the discussion because it is open. All of it is open, and we need to have these conversations. And we'd love to have more intellectuals who relate to the movements, relating to us directly and having the discussions, not telling us what to do. That part is not useful. But we're organizing despite all of it, and the movement is flourishing.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion. We're talking to Marina Sitrin. She is a graduate student at CUNY. Chris Hedges, who is suing Barack Obama over the National Defense Authorization Act and got arrested in front of Goldman Sachs. He was a reporter for the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter at that. Also, Amin Husain is with us, who is one of the editors of Tidal Magazine, one of the key organizers of the Occupy movement, and Teresa Gutierrez with the May 1st Coalition for Worker and Immigrant Rights. This is Democracy Now! It's May Day. We'll be back in a minute.